Hey friends, you might think we need Photoshop to create abstract portraits like this. And that's good if you are okay with the price tag and the steep learning curve. But I'm here to demonstrate how we can do this easily with Inkscape. We'll do it for free and with a gentle learning curve. Let's take a look at the process. First off, we'll need a high-quality photograph to get the best results. The better the resolution, the better the result. Also, you want it to be a portrait to begin with. I found this example on Pixabay. To make portraits of the people in your life, use your own camera. Our smartphone cameras are more than capable of giving us high-quality images. Next, we're going to remove the background. We'll also choose the portion of the subject we'd like to appear in the portrait. Then we're going to convert the photo into a black and white poster like this. We'll use a series of 4 filters and then follow that up with Trace Bitmap. The next step will be to separate the 4 shades of gray that we get from our Trace Bitmap and then have a white layer and a background layer below that. Then we'll take some pre-selected textures that we have and apply them to the layers 2 through 5. Then we'll use another texture for the background and also find an overlay if we'd like to use that. All these textures can be found on sites like Pixabay or Vecteezy. Here's our final result. We can export the page and use this any way we like. Alright, let's jump into Inkscape to get started. I'm going to right-click and take a look at the document properties. I'm using a page size of 8 by 8 inches. I'll remove the border from the page, and I'm going to change the page color to yellow, which is a hex code of FFFF00. Here's my folder with the images of the original picture and the textures and the background overlay. By the way, if you'd like to follow along now or after you watch the video, I'm making this folder available for you to download. Check out the instructions in the description. I'll drag the original image into Inkscape. I'm changing the opacity down to about 50%, so now I can resize the portion of this image that I would like to appear on the page. Now I'm going to use the pen tool to trace the part of the image that overlaps with the page. Notice in the upper right corner what our current fill and stroke settings are. Down at the bottom, I'll use the red X to turn off the fill color. Then I'll hold down the Shift key and I'll select red for the color of the stroke. Now I'm going to turn snapping on so I can select the points where the image and the page overlap. I'll select the 2 points and then double-click at the last point to make a line segment. Now I'm done with snapping, and I'll go back to the selection tool and turn up the opacity on both the line segment and on the photo. Now I'll go back to the pen tool and zoom in as much as I can so I can see where the line segment left off. I need to hover over the end of the line segment until I can see the node, and then I will click. Now I'm able to go ahead and make a rough outline of the rest of the image. Once I connect it to the node at the beginning of the line segment, this part of the tracing is complete. Now I'll switch to the Nodes tool and go back around and fill out all of the curves. We don't have to worry about being super accurate because this is going to be an abstract portrait anyway. Okay, let's zoom back to the page to see the final tracing. With the tracing selected, we'll go back to the selection tool and select the rest of the image. Now we can go ahead and use Object, Clip, Set Clip to get rid of the background. A little bit later, we're going to use Trace Bitmap on this image, but the background is still there in the background, and so we need to do this step first. We're going to use File, Export, to save this as its own image. Make sure to use the Selection tab at the top. We'll go down to the folder icon and make sure we're in the folder we want, and then set the type as a PNG file. Then we'll give it the file name and go ahead and click the Save button. Now we're able to remove this clipped image. Here's our folder with the image and no background, and we can drag that back into Inkscape. Now let's align this back to the page using the Align and Distribute tab. Make sure the relative to setting is set to page, and we'll align it to the bottom and center of the page. Okay, we're ready to start applying the filters. We'll go to Filters, Color, Duochrome to turn this into a black and white image. For color 1, we want black, so you can slide the L slider all the way to the left or use the hex code of all zeros. For color 2, we want white, so you can slide the L slider all the way to the right or use the hex code of all Fs. In the options, we want the swap to be set to no swap. Let's turn on the live preview to see what we'll get. We can go dark or really light. I'll choose a setting that gives us a nice contrast between the dark and the light. When you're happy, click Apply and Close. Our next filter is Image Effects and Sharpen More. I don't think this photo needed much sharpening, but others may respond to this one. Our third filter is Image Paint and Draw and Poster Paint. These are the levels I'm using. An effect type of normal, a transfer type of painting, levels at 4, a blend mode of darken, and the remaining options are at their minimum levels. Again, let's check out the live preview, and it looks good, so we'll click Apply and Close. Our final filter again is Image Paint and Draw, and this time Posterize Basic. For this one, I'm always going to use levels set at 4 and simplify at its minimum value. Let's check out the preview and then Apply and Close. Now it's time to use Path and Trace Bitmap. Notice that the Live Updates checkbox should already be checked for us. Generally, what Trace Bitmap does is take the input parameters we give it and scan the photo to turn it into a vector. Here are the settings we're going to use, starting by using the Multicolor tab at the top. Our detection mode is going to be the grays. I'm setting the number of scans to 5. I want the scans to be smooth and remove the background. This will take us down to 4 scans as the result. The preview looks good, so I'll click Apply, and then we're done with the Trace Bitmap tab for now. Okay, now it's time to work with Object and Layers and Objects. This opens a new tab on the right where we can see what's going on. Notice that the Trace Bitmap result is put into a group, and we see the 4 paths that it gave us. Also notice if we turn off the visibility to the group, we can see the image that is still there below it. We don't actually need the group, so I'm going to right-click that and select Ungroup. We won't need to see the image for a while, so I'll go ahead and turn off its visibility now. This lets me notice that Trace Bitmap didn't capture the entire image, but that's fine. We'll make another layer to take care of this later. If I turn off the visibility of each of these paths and then turn them on from the top to the bottom, you can see that it's got the darkest path at the top and the lightest one at the bottom. Okay, what I would like is for each of these paths to be in its own layer, so I'm going to make 3 copies of this current layer. And I'll double-click each of these layer names to rename them to Black, Dark, Medium, and Light. In the black layer, we don't need the image anymore, so I'll delete that. And I want to delete the bottom 3 paths. You can sometimes select a range of these paths by holding down the Shift key and selecting one end of the range and the other, or you can select them one by using the Control key. Now in the dark layer, we'll get rid of the image as well and just keep the second path. In the medium layer, we'll get rid of the image again and just keep the third path. And in the light layer, the image is still not visible, which is good, and we'll just keep the fourth path. Now I can make each of these layers invisible and turn on the visibility again from top to bottom just to make sure we did everything correctly. Okay, now here comes the fun part of setting up the colors and textures for each of these layers. In the black layer, because we're dealing with a path that we got from Trace Bitmap, we can set it to any color we'd like. I would like it to be black, so it looks like a stencil outline. I can go ahead and lock this layer so I don't inadvertently change something. In the next layers, we're going to use textures to fill the paths. The first step in doing this is to right-click the path and use Set Clip Group. When we do this, we get a new group, and the original path is put into a folder called Clip. So now anything that we drag into this new group will only show what the original path covers. Alright, let's drag in the image that I've designated for the dark layer. Now, since the image is not in the clip group yet, we can manipulate it however we like. Now I'm going to zoom to the page so we can see what happens next. I'm going to drag the image into the clip group. When you see the green outline of where you're dragging it, then you can just let go. There we go. Now that's pretty cool. Notice that I can still grab this image and move it around within the clip group. If I decide I want to do some more manipulation, I can drag it back out into the top of the layer. Let's say I want to rotate it and resize it a bit. Now I'll zoom back to the page, and I'll drag it back into the clip group. Now we can fine-tune how dark or light this texture is within the portrait. For this, I'll use Filters, Color, Lightness Contrast. Let's turn on the live preview, and it's using the same settings for the last time that it was used. So we'll adjust the lightness and contrast to get what we want. This layer needs to be fairly dark relative to the black and the other two layers below it. When we're happy, we'll click Apply and Close. Now I can lock up this layer and we'll move on to the medium layer. We'll set the clip group for this path. And let's drag in the image for the medium layer. For this one, I decided I wanted the brush strokes to be on a diagonal and to use just mostly the red and the orange coloring. I'll zoom to the page again and drag the image into the clip group. And it's time to adjust the lightness and contrast again, this time to be a little bit lighter than the layer above it. Okay, lock it up. Let's move on to the light layer. Set the clip group. Drag in the image for the light layer. Manipulate it so it covers the part of the face we want. Zoom to the page and drag the image into the clip group. And we'll set the lightness contrast to make it a little bit lighter than the layer above it. Okay, nice. Let's lock up this layer too. Alright, to take care of the yellow spaces, let's select the light layer and use the plus sign to add a new layer below the current layer. We'll call it the white layer. I'm going to drag the original image that's still left in the light layer into this new layer, and we'll use that to make a clip group. Let's turn on the visibility of the image now, and turn off the visibility of all the other layers so we can see what's going on. Now we're going to use Trace Bitmap again to help us make the clip group. This time we can just use the Single Scan tab and use the Brightness Cutoff detection mode. We want to drag the threshold slider until it captures the entire shape of the portrait, but not any of the background. When we're happy, click Apply and close the Trace Bitmap tab. Now this resulting path is what we can use to turn into a clip group. And we can turn off visibility to our image again. Let's turn on the visibility of the other layers now. Now we can drag in the texture we want to use for the white layer. To match with the other color schemes, I just want the orange part of this texture to cover the face. Let's zoom to the page again and drag the texture into the clip group. And now we'll fine-tune the lightness and contrast again. Alright, let's lock up this layer. And we'll make a new layer below this and call it Background. So now to make a clip group, I'm going to use the Rectangle tool. And let me just draw a starter one so I can set the fill and the stroke the way I would like it to be. Okay, now with the Selection tool and snapping turned on, let's drag it and snap it to the top left corner of the page. Then we can drag the bottom right corner and snap it to the bottom right corner of the page as well. We're done with snapping now, so thank you for your service. Let's turn this rectangle into a clip group so we can define our background. Now let's drag in our background texture image. I like this on an angle also, so let me set that up. Alright, I'll zoom to the page again and drag the texture into the clip group. Okay, let's fine-tune the lightness and contrast of this. I want it to be fairly light so it doesn't dominate the portrait. Now I'm going to select the background layer again because I want to move something else inside. I have this sheet music image that I would like to use as an overlay to the background. However, I don't need the brown paper behind it, so let's use Trace Bitmap to separate the notes from the paper. Again, the single scan and brightness cutoff will work for us, and I'll just move the slider to the point where I don't see any of the paper background. Great. Once we're done with that, we don't need the image anymore, so I can delete that. Now with our resulting vector, I can resize it and place it where I want it to be. Let's zoom to the page again and drag this new overlay into the clip group. Just so you can see how this works, if I move it down one level, it's behind the background image, so I'll put it back above it. Finally, I can select the color because it's a path, so here's yellow as an example, and I'll choose the final one I'd like to use. Alright, I can lock up this layer and we're done. The last thing to do is to use File, Export, to get a PNG version of our final result. This time I want to use the Page tab to export our PNG image. Here is our final PNG image. Now you know all the steps to do this yourself with any photo you'd like to begin with. There may be a time during this process you want to make a few adjustments, so let's go over that now. This is the second example I have, and you can see from the original photo that there's quite a bit of darkness on the left side here, and that might cause a slight issue. To demonstrate this, I made a new example layer at the bottom and put in the image after the first 4 filters have been applied. And now here's the Trace Bitmap preview after using the 5 scans like we did for the first example. The darkness on the left side is a little bit overpowering. So what we can do is increase the number of scans to 25, and now look at the preview. After removing the path for the background, that would leave us with 24 paths, and theoretically, if we divide that by 4, we could use 6 paths per shade of gray. But what I would like to do is use fewer paths for the darkest shades. So let's go ahead and apply this. And we'll set the image to invisible, and we'll ungroup the Trace Bitmap group result to see all 24 of the paths. With them all being selected, I can turn off the visibility of one of them to make them all invisible. Now let's start turning on the visibility of the top 4 paths to see what that looks like. That still seems a little too dark for me. Let's go up to my original completed project for this one, and in the black layer, we can see that I really only kept the top 2 paths. Alright, so that's the adjustment we need. I'll make the 3rd and the 4th path invisible, and then I can group the top 2 paths together. Now looking at the dark layer, I decided to keep the next 8 paths for that. Alright, so I'll make the next 8 paths visible and group them together. Now looking at the original medium layer, I decided to keep the next 9 paths. So I'll make the next 9 paths visible and group them together. And finally in the light layer, I kept the final 5 paths. So I'll make those last ones visible and group them together as well. And I can do my testing routine of making each of these groups now invisible and visible again from top to bottom. And at this point, we would carry on with the same steps as we did before. The only difference is we have 4 groups instead of 4 paths. And we don't need to be concerned that each of these groups has different shading within it because we're turning that into a clip group, and that's the only thing that matters. And here's our final result. Now you also might be wondering, how can I manipulate this final result within Inkscape here instead of turning it into a PNG first? Well, let's cover what we can do with that. There's a capability within Layers and Objects to right-click a layer and turn it into a group. Let's go ahead and do that for each of these layers. Now I want to group all these groups together, so I'll add a new layer at the bottom and call it Final Result. Now I can drag each of our new groups into this Final Result group, and starting from the bottom and working my way up will retain the correct hierarchy. I can collapse the Final Result group and then use that to manipulate the size and position of our final result. Oops, I dragged off part of his face because I didn't have the whole final result selected. Let's try that again. I can drag it anywhere I want. I can also resize it, let's say to 20 by 20 inches. If I zoom to the selection and drag it off to the left, we can see how it compares with the original page. All right, here's my final example. I took this image from the outro of my last video. So I took that video with my smartphone and I zoomed in to make the outro, and I took a frame of the video. So the quality of this picture is really just so-so, but again, our smartphones have really good cameras. Here's the result of the trace bitmap with the original 5 scans that we used in the first example. There is too much darkness around the mouth, so it looks like I only have 2 front teeth. I used the same technique as in my second example and used 25 scans in trace bitmap and divided them up disproportionately to give myself a full set of teeth. Okay, that's it. I hope you try this yourself using the download that I made available. And once you have the process down, you can do this with any photo that you choose to use. All right, if that wasn't having a lot of fun with Inkscape, I don't know what is. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a few things along the way. Hey, if there's any kind of art form that you'd like me to explore with Inkscape, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, until then, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.